On Christmas Eve 2022, Jennifer Heath Box got off a cruise ship in Florida, excited to return home to Texas and spend Christmas with her children before her son was deployed. Instead, police arrested her as she got off the ship, and she spent Christmas in jail, where guards pumped death metal music and freezing air into the cells. All because police were looking for a woman who didn't look like Jennifer, was half her age, and didn't even have the same name. I'm Kim Norberg of the nonprofit civil liberties law firm, the Institute for Justice, joined by co-host Keith Neely. Today we have with us IJ attorneys Jared McClain and Bobbi Taylor. This is Beyond the Brief. So Bobbi, tell us what happened to Jennifer.
Sure. So just before Christmas of 2022, Jennifer Heath Box was taking a cruise with her family to the Caribbean. And it was Jennifer, her husband, her brother Mark, and her sister-in-law. And they had gone on this cruise to celebrate the fact that Jennifer's brother Mark had just beaten cancer for the second time. So it was a celebratory, happy event. And they were getting back to Florida at Port Everglades on the morning of Christmas Eve, December 24th. And as Jennifer scanned her ID to disembark from the ship, she was immediately surrounded by deputies from the Broward County Sheriff's Office. And they pulled her over to the side and they told her that there was a warrant out for her arrest. And when she asked what for, they told her it was for endangering a child. And this really surprised Jennifer because her children at the time were grown. I think her youngest was 18 at the time. And so she and her husband insist, I think you've got the wrong person. And the officers at the scene keep telling her, well, we're going to verify. Well, instead of verifying that they had the right person, they proceed to arrest Jennifer in front of everyone leaving the cruise, put her hands behind her back, put handcuffs on her, lead her down the elevator, lead her to a waiting police car, and put her in the back of a police car before they've ever confirmed that she is, in fact, the subject of the warrant. And she's not. The warrant was for a Jennifer Del Carmen Heath. And the only two similarities between the two women is that they both lived in Texas and their first names were both Jennifer. So Jennifer is protesting, this whole time, I don't have minor children. I think you have the wrong person. I don't understand. When they get to the jail, the booking officer at the jail tells the arresting officer, after she scans Jennifer's driver's license, that there's no outstanding warrants for Jennifer. And the arresting officer insists that she be put in jail anyway. And she was in jail for almost 3 days before they realized their mistake, and then the next day they let her out. So she was in jail for 3 days. She missed Christmas with her children. She missed seeing her son Joshua before he deployed with the Marines. And ever since then, she's just been nervous about traveling, nervous about flying. She gets stopped by TSA randomly every time she flies. And this has just taken its toll on her.
So just how obvious was it, Jared, that they had the wrong person? Like, should they have known at the scene on the boat?
So I think that it was so obvious that the police officer should have known before they even got on the boat. After Jennifer got arrested, her brother Mark, who is a police officer himself, he was looking into it, seeing what he could figure out. He called a local attorney in Houston and got some help. And it took them a half a day to figure out, not even like from the outside, just like public records that were available. It took them a half day to figure out that this was a warrant for someone who was much younger, completely different demographics, and found out what the warrant was for, found out it was the complaining witness was that other Jennifer's husband, found out everything about the case. And it took them, as people outside of the legal system, a half day to figure it out. And the reason I say it should have been obvious before they got on the boat is because Jennifer's cruise was a week long, and Customs and Border Patrol runs the ship's manifest when people go on a cruise. And so they had that entire week from the point where they flagged her name as someone who might have a warrant to check the public records, to check the information that was available, and to figure out whether this was the right person or not. And they just completely failed to do that.
Well, and the weird thing too, right, is Jennifer wasn't the only Jennifer Heath in her party, right? Isn't her sister-in-law also named Jennifer Heath?
That's right.
But not the Jennifer that police were actually looking for. So they stopped the wrong person. They happened to stop the wrong person in a party where there were two people who could have fit this, supposed wanted fugitive, and that still didn't give the police pause.
Oh, it's interesting because when Jennifer's in the back of the police car, she brings up this fact to the arresting officer, Peter Peraza, and she says, my sister's on this boat. My sister-in-law's on this boat too, and she's also Jennifer Heath. And Jennifer says that it was like this aha moment where he just paused, and it seemed like he considered for the first time that two people might share the same name, and then he just like long blink and power through it.
Wow. And so then they took her to the jail, and at the jail, the booking officer says, I don't think this is the right person. And that same arresting officer, who, again, had maybe that aha moment in the car, still said, nope, book her, throw her in jail. That's it.
Yeah, just path determinacy. Like, he knew what he was going to do. He set out. He boarded the ship. And he says, like, when you listen to the body cam footage, he's complaining to his partner that people are questioning it. And he says, I tell them before I leave the station if I'm going to make an arrest. And I know that I'm going to make an arrest. And he couldn't really understand why people were questioning him. He set out to make an arrest that day. He found someone named Jennifer Heath, and it was his job to put her in jail for the holidays.
Wow. I mean, it kind of sounds like, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. He was out to arrest somebody that day. Didn't matter who it was. Jennifer Heath just happened to be the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So after Jennifer was released, what did she do next, and what did the county do?
Jennifer called Broward County and filed a complaint. And Mark, her brother, also reached out to the government officials, the senator in Florida, the mayor. And the government officials that she reached out to, or that they reached out to, said, this isn't our problem. You have to contact the sheriff's office. And in Jennifer's request, she's very explicit about why she's reaching out to these political officials, and that is because millions of people go on cruise ships in Florida every year. And she says, to know that this is happening, it could really hurt the tourism industry. So as government officials, you need to be concerned about this. And they kind of pass the buck on to the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office, in response to a news story about the incident, did say that they conducted an investigation and that Officer or Deputy Peraza did not violate any of their policies and procedures.
So what kind of are these policies and procedures? I mean, so she got flagged as she was getting off the boat. There's another Jennifer Heath, doesn't get flagged somehow. And then she just kind of like gets dragged into jail, sit in jail while we figure it out. Like, all the county is saying all of that is totally normal. We can just flag random people. We can just throw them in jail for however long until we figure out what's going on. And they take like no qualms with that at all.
That's right. And I don't know what the policies and procedures are exactly, but if that's the result, then something needs to change.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's important to keep in mind, like Jennifer was in jail for 3 days. I think we'll talk about later how some courts have said like 3 days, that's as much time as it takes police to figure this stuff out. No harm, no foul. And she was in jail for 3 days, but their booking procedures were complete by that point. The only reason they even stopped and figured it out is because of the persistence of her husband and her brother-in-law. Mark kept calling people at the jail and saying, like, my sister's in there and shouldn't be in there. And then he got an attorney to help and get court records, and they were forwarding all of this on. And it was only because of their outside pressure that they were putting on that Jennifer was even released in those 3 days, because she had gone to a bail hearing, had bail denied because it was an extraditable warrant for someone else, and then they transferred her to the women's facility. And so she was already locked into the jail that they were planning to keep her in for 30 days until Texas came to collect her.
And as I understand it too, and Bobbi, maybe you can share a little bit about this, the conditions of that jail were horrific. What did she experience in those 3 days?
That's right. Well, first of all, at the time of booking, she was strip searched and cavity searched. And she talks about how dehumanizing it was and how that you're treated like a criminal before they've even proven that you've done anything wrong. And The jail cells were cold. The guards pumped death metal into her cells at night. She talks about how she's got a very thin blanket and a very thin shirt while the guards are in gloves and beanie hats. And the first night there was a fight in the men's cell, and it was some time before the guards intervened. So she sat there with her hands over her ears, just scared and worried that something was going to happen in the women's cell in response. And it was just brutal conditions.
Wow.
Yeah, it genuinely seems like they have modeled the Broward County Jail after Guantanamo Bay.
Oh my goodness.
Like they're pumping freezing air into these cells while the guards are all dressed in winter clothing in Florida. Like if you're showing up to work dressed in winter clothing in Florida, like something has gone wrong.
Right.
And so like Jennifer, in order to keep warm, is forced to sleep back to back with her cellmate, a complete stranger, just so they can share body heat.
That's unbelievable. So let's take a step back further. How often does this kind of stuff happen? I mean, I can think of a couple of IJ cases where we've had some mistaken identities. Even in James King's case, for example, right? They mistook him for a fugitive, tried to arrest him, beat him, and that's what launched his case. But do we have numbers or any statistics on how often police officers misidentify the people that they're looking for, arrest the wrong person, hold them in jail?
Yeah, there's statistics out there that every single day there's a mistaken identity arrest.
Wow.
So hundreds a year. And as we're going to talk about, like the reason that IJ is bringing a case like this is because these happen all the day. It disrupts people's lives. 3 days in jail, you can lose your job, you lose your car. Like the spiraling consequences from that are great. And the courts are just so far not really interested in holding anyone accountable for what seems to be a recurring and preventable problem.
Well, and in Jennifer's case, right, she lost the opportunity to see her son before he was deployed. Was that the last time that her family was all together prior to the deployment?
That's right. She missed the last time having all of her children together before her son's deployment. So to this day, she hasn't had all of her kids together.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, and so she's sitting in jail just like watching the clock and like, am I going to be able to get out in time for me to get a flight home so I can see my kids while they're still together? Because her son's in the Marines. He's been in Japan for 3 years, or for a 3-year tour. He's 2 years into that.
So let's talk about the lawsuit. Is Jennifer and IJ, are we suing the official, or are we suing the county, since he says, I was just following county policies, and the county says that too? Like, kind of who's to fault here? Who's on the other side of the lawsuit?
Yeah, so we are suing everyone in classic IJ fashion. And so we are suing both the individual officers who are responsible because they knew or should have known better when they were putting someone in jail, and they had a personal duty to confirm who they were putting in jail and whether she matched the warrant. And we're also suing the county and the sheriff's office for what we call municipal or Monell liability, because they have, as Bobbi was saying, like this, they have confirmed that this arrest happened pursuant to their practices, and that everything, their policies and practices were followed, and this was the result. And we know that this is not the first or the second time that Broward County has done this. It's not even the first time that they've arrested the wrong woman getting off a cruise ship for child endangerment. They know that this is a problem, and they continue to not do anything about it. And so one thing that we're trying to accomplish in this lawsuit is to force them to do something about it.
Did you know IJ represents ordinary people, free of charge, as they fight back against government abuse? If you're looking for a rewarding way to support our work, consider becoming a member of our merry band of monthly donors and stand shoulder to shoulder with IJ's clients every month of the year. Monthly donations are convenient and cost-efficient, meaning more of your money goes directly to our fight for freedom and justice. Sign up to donate today at ij.org/monthly.
So, Keith, I think, kind of alluded to this earlier. We were involved somewhat in another case out of the 11th Circuit. Florida's in the 11th Circuit, involving a guy called David Sosa. And so can you kind of highlight what the David Sosa thing was all about, and then kind of talk about, what do we hope to accomplish with, bringing another similar case in the same circuit? Like, what's kind of...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so back before I started at IJ, this would have been maybe 2021, a 3-judge panel in the 11th Circuit issued a decision 2-1 ruling that police officers who arrested the wrong David Sosa for the second time were not entitled to qualified immunity. And so this guy, I saw it in John Ross's Short Circuit newsletter, caught my attention, and caught my attention because, like, especially back then, qualified immunity decisions going against the officers were exceedingly rare. And this one stood out because David Sosa lived in Martin County, Florida, got pulled over there for speeding or some traffic violation. They ran his name and found a 30-year-old warrant from Texas for someone else named David Sosa, who different height, different age, different tattoos, all the different markers are different. And they take him to jail. They hold him for a few hours. They realize their mistake. They release him. 2 years later, gets pulled over again in Martin County. They say, step out of the car. There's a warrant for your arrest. And he's like, guys, we have been through this before. Right. I can tell you all of the different markers. I can tell you who you think I am, and I can tell you why I'm not that person. This time, it didn't just last 3 hours. The second time they arrested him, they held him for 3 days. And it wasn't over a weekend. It was like a Tuesday to a Friday. He spent the week in jail. They impounded his car. He missed work. And his argument to the court was these officers should have known better. It was an arbitrary arrest, and he brought his case mainly under the due process clause because there have been cases going back to the 70s saying that it violates your substantive due process rights to be held arbitrarily on someone else's warrant. And like I was saying, the panel ruled 2-1 in this guy's favor, and then the case went en banc. And I reached out and tried to take over the case at that point when I was on my way to IJ, and it didn't quite work out. And then the 11th Circuit reversed 11-1. One of the 2 judges who voted in his favor retired before it went en banc. And so the altering judge of the opinion was the only vote in his favor for the entire 11th Circuit. And so he lost the case 11-1, and a majority of the court ruled that there's no due process right. This doesn't violate due process. And there were a few judges who said, we don't quite agree with that, but the officers couldn't have known any better. And so qualified immunity to the officers. And what they were relying on, there's this case, a Rehnquist decision from, I think, the 70s, where there are 2 brothers who, I want to say Lonnie and Leroy McClellan or something like that, two good old boys doing crimes in the South. And the one went on a crime spree and forged his ID with his brother's name on it and gets arrested. The police book him as his brother because his ID has his brother's name on it, and he skips bail. And then police arrest his brother for the outstanding warrant because his brother jumped bail. And it was over New Year's Day, and they didn't have computers yet. And so it took the cops a few days to figure out that they had the wrong brother. And the Supreme Court was like, all right, this is all seems
a weird situation.
Yeah, this is a weird situation.
Right.
This seems understandable. We hold that because they only held him for 3 days, it only took them 3 days to figure it out, that it didn't violate this guy's due process rights. And the 11th Circuit took that decision based off those very insane and quirky facts in the pre-internet age and said, the Supreme Court has said there's a 3-day exception to the due process clause. So if police only hold you in jail for 3 days, it doesn't violate your constitutional rights. And so those judges concurring who were saying qualified immunity were like, well, if you can hold the McClellan brother for 3 days, how were police to know that you couldn't hold the wrong David Sosa for a second time if you only held him for 3 days?
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing, for lawyers like you guys, sort of everything is due process in ways that, maybe don't make a ton of sense intuitively to a regular person. But if anything is due process, just kind of instinctively, it's that I shouldn't just arbitrarily get arrested and thrown in jail, then, we'll figure it out later. And this idea of the internet exists now, the way that you do policing, the way that you get information is so different now. And it seems to me that if this kind of gets to stand, that means they could just run around and they could arrest Bobbi tomorrow just for kind of no reason, throw her in jail for 3 days, and then let her out and say, oh, well, it was, 3 days,
Yeah.
so we're fine,
Oh,
right? Like, that's crazy.
Police in Martin County could arrest David Sosa again and not face any consequences because the court didn't just hold qualified immunity. They held that it didn't even violate his constitutional rights. And Judge Rosenbaum, who was the panel majority's author and the lone dissenting judge, she said that maybe this claim should sound in the Fourth Amendment, and it's an unreasonable seizure. And there are some other the circuits are sort of split on whether they're addressing this under due process or the Fourth Amendment. And we filed an amicus brief on behalf of David Sosa, or I should say on behalf of David Sosa's. We filed an amicus brief on behalf of several men also named David Sosa to say, like, look, we share this guy's name too, and we don't want to be held in jail for 3 days. And we made the point that, like, we know that substantive due process is disfavored by a lot of judges and justices, but, like, an arbitrary deprivation of your liberty, being locked in jail for no reason, like, if it means anything, it has to cover this. And if not, the Fourth Amendment is right there. The Supreme Court has held in the last 10 years that continued detentions, once you get arrested and booked in jail, the Fourth Amendment is still applies at that point. So we made that point to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court didn't take the case, and then we heard Jennifer's story, and we saw an opportunity to sort of rectify the wrongs of David Sosa's case and build Jennifer's case from the ground up and hopefully convince the court that, okay, you said that substantive due process doesn't apply. We recognize that some of you guys don't like substantive due process. Here's the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment either applies or nothing does, and you are saying that there is just a 3-day constitutional exception when police hold someone in jail on the wrong warrant.
So, Bobbi, how did Jennifer react when you got in touch with her, when, we said that IJ would take her case? What was her reaction there?
I think she was relieved that someone was finally willing to do something for her. Like I said, she had contacted so many people, both in and out of Broward County, in Florida, in Texas. She had gotten some news media traction, but no one was able to explain to her why what happened to her was okay. And I think IJ coming in and saying, no, what happened to you is not okay. We've done this before. We'd like to do it again. Will you help us? I think she was very happy. And Jennifer's been great to work with. She's a typical IJ client. She's just very focused on making sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. And she's in it for the long haul. She's in it to change precedent. And she's great.
One of the unique facts of this case is that, her brother-in-law, who was a police officer himself, he was able to figure out that they had the wrong person in less than a day. I think it was maybe a few hours. And qualified immunity is often said to protect all but the plainly incompetent. It seems kind of damaging to Broward County in this case, and to the law enforcement officer that arrested Jennifer Heath, that an out of jurisdiction police officer could figure out what they'd done wrong in a fraction of the time that it took them to ultimately release Jennifer, right?
Right. And without the same access to the databases, and without any of the information that they were going off of, he didn't have Broward County would have had the warrant. He didn't even have that. He was starting from square one and working with an attorney in another state who over Christmas, they're making phone calls, and still in a matter of hours were able to figure it out. And Broward County again, I don't want to give them credit for figuring it out in 3 days, because they didn't. They just finally listened when someone else was telling them, we figured this out for you, please let her out of jail. And even then it took them another day.
Well, and not just that, the person at the jail that Mark was speaking to kept saying, well, she needs to go to the kiosk and report this. She needs to go. So making it sound like it was Jennifer's responsibility to rectify their mistake and get herself out of jail. That's absurd.
Yeah. And then when he was still telling her that she needed to go to the kiosk and report something that she had been telling them from the moment that they arrested her, something she told the booking officer, something she told the arresting officers. They were saying that she still had to put this in a kiosk. We found out later that they already knew about the mistake when he was telling her that. and because Mark had been calling repeatedly another officer at the jail, and that officer came back to her cell, and he said, listen, we know that we have the wrong Jennifer Heath, but we need to hold you until they arrest the right Jennifer Heath, or Texas comes to collect you. And if they have the wrong Jennifer Heath, why on earth would Texas come to Florida to pick her up?
So, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. So, like, we have to hold you in jail so that when Texas comes to get a Jennifer Heath,
yeah, like
what? ... There's a Jennifer Heath in jail, and then they just... I don't understand.
Like the Houston Police Department's just going to drive 4 states away to pick up an innocent person? Like, what? That's not a very good use of taxpayer money.
Has anyone ever apologized to Jennifer for what she experienced?
No.
No one in Broward County, the sheriff who arrested her, nobody has said, even admitted that they've done anything wrong.
No, they have not admitted that they've done anything wrong. When they released Jennifer from the jail, the parting words that she got were, "It happens."
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And so, like, the point of this case and why Jennifer is involved is to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Going back to Jennifer's arrest for a minute, there's this thing that you talked about briefly about how, you know, her ID is scanned when she gets off the cruise ship, and I assume that's some sort of like CBP thing because she's, you know, coming in from out of the country. And that just strikes me as a little strange, right? Like the baseline kind of surveillance state vibe of that seems pretty, you know, I don't know why a boat feels different from an airplane to me, but like they check her getting on and off the boat at all of these different ports, presumably. So, you know, what could possibly happen? But like, how does this case kind of tie in to the rest of our cases about sort of border control and surveillance and things like that?
Yeah, I think so recently IJ's been bringing a lot of mistake cases by police. They're completely innocent victims. In Jennifer's case, in James King's case, the police just have the wrong person. They're looking for one person and they assault or arrest and detain another person in violation of their rights.
In a way that's preventable, right?
In
it's
a way
not
that,
like a split second in the moment thing.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. And we also have this other offshoot of these mistake cases, which are wrong house raids. And we have a cert petition right now in Jimerson versus Lewis out of the Fifth Circuit, where police had a warrant for one house. They showed up to a different house. They realized when they got there, we're at the wrong house. And then they guessed again, and they once again went to the wrong house and raided the home of an innocent family. And so we have a few wrong house raid cases that we have, and one of them is a federal officer, so it's the Federal Tort Claims Act instead of qualified immunity. And since we brought Jennifer's case, we've heard from countless people who have every iteration of this that you can think of. And some of them don't fit into IJ cases, some of them do, but the Customs and Border Patrol running the name and apparently like just the name of people who get them.
Part of the name, right? Because her name is Jennifer Heath Box, and the warrant is for somebody like Jennifer something Heath, right?
Jennifer Del Carmen Heath, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and just
so
part
even
of,
like on paper, they're obviously different people.
And then also the sister-in-law. I come back to this too. They scan both their IDs, but only one of their IDs hits as you could be the Jennifer Heath with the outstanding warrant. How does that? I mean, it's also confusing to me.
Yeah, and this goes to the Olivia Rodrigo thing, where she was just on TV talking about how I think she was coming back from Canada, and they pulled her aside for Olivia Rodriguez. So it's not even the same name at that point. And like, how many people have the last name Rodriguez? And if we're going to expand that out to everything that sort of sounds like it, and CBP is going to flag and pull all of those people out, it's not a system based on reasonableness, and it lends itself to innocent people being detained arbitrarily. And
so, Bobbi, we've sort of alluded to this a little bit, but you know, what's the distinction between what happened with Jennifer and kind of what we're calling into question, and sort of the general idea that, you know, police have difficult jobs and, have to make these split-second decisions and things like that. Is there any tension between these two things, or?
I don't think so in this case, because I think, as Jared said, this wasn't a split-second decision. The decision to arrest Jennifer was made, we believe, right as she got on the boat, and they had a week to review the paperwork and make sure that they were arresting the right person. And then once she was arrested, it was just a series of mistakes over a series of days. Not a situation like we see in some of these cases where the police have a split-second decision. It's life or death. It's safety. This was a woman who was not resisting arrest. She was very compliant. They made the decision to keep her in jail, even though her driver's license didn't reveal any warrants. They made the decision to keep her in jail even after they learned that she wasn't the right person. It's just a series of mistakes, and no split-second decision-making went into those mistakes.
Well, almost more than a mistake. I mean,
Right,
it
that's
sounds
what I was
like
gonna
willful
say.
ignorance more than anything else.
Mistake is kind of generous,
Yeah.
right?
At some point, it becomes just a conscious disregard for her constitutional rights.
Right. Mistake is generous. And I think the theme in these cases that we bring is when these kinds of mistakes are made, who bears the cost? It should not be the innocent victim.
Yeah, and I was going to say that IJ is looking to develop these cases. If this has happened to you or someone you know, like, you should reach out to IJ. We know that it's extremely difficult to find a lawyer to bring these cases. Jennifer and her aunt, they were just scrolling Martindale and emailing every licensed attorney they could find for years and could not find anyone to take the case because the courts are against awarding compensation in cases like these, even if you do win, the amount's likely to be small. So for a private attorney, there's not much incentive to bring cases like this. And that's why for a place like us who's interested in structural change, like these cases, we were out there looking for someone like Jennifer while Jennifer was looking for someone like us. And it was only serendipity and an article about the David Sosa case that flagged IJ for Jennifer. But now that we've bringing them and we sort of planted our flag in this issue, people should reach out to IJ.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks so much for coming in and talking with us, guys, and good luck with the case.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching today's episode. Our last episode covered Pennsylvania's fish cops and their unconstitutional practice of entering people's property without a warrant and without probable cause that they had committed a crime. Lots of you had great questions and comments, so let's take a look at a few. Wilson Pipe Testing writes, the state has authority over public lands and state-controlled lands. Where do they get the authority over private property? The law isn't unconstitutional, it's being misapplied to the people on private property. Well, that's a great question, Wilson, and I think you're half right. As you rightly point out, the statute that authorizes fish cops to carry out their duties is incredibly broad. It authorizes them to enter upon any land or water to do their jobs. And it's harder to imagine a broader authorization than that. To be clear, though, Pennsylvania does have the authority to patrol public waters and enforce wildlife regulations. Natural bodies of water like Butler Lake are considered public property, and Pennsylvania's fish cops may have a legitimate need to enter someone else's property to carry out their duties. But the Fourth Amendment says that if the government wants to do that, it needs to obtain a warrant before a neutral judge first. Pennsylvania's fish cops aren't doing that, and we plan to sue them until they do. At Scott Hannon writes in, bad buoys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when the fish cops are coming for you? Stop clown fishing around now, Scott. Ty Webb writes in, a great big thank you to the Institute for Justice for getting this type of law changed forever in the state of Tennessee. The TWRA can no longer work under warrantless surveillance and freely trespass on landowners' property. Well, thanks for your support, Ty. As a fellow Tennessean, I always love it when IJ can win cases in my backyard and help make the state just a little better. Here's a fun Tennessee history fact for you. Tennessee was one of the first states in American history to adopt an equal protection provision as part of its Constitution in 1835. That's over 30 years before the Equal Protection Clause was added as part of the 14th Amendment to the federal Constitution. What were Tennesseans concerned about in 1835? Preventing the state government from unfairly preferencing some businesses and individuals over others. Now, I think that's a cause we can all get behind. Speaking of economic liberty, BreadFan1071 writes in, I'm so sick of needing permits to do things we should have the right to do as long as we don't harm anyone or their stuff. Well, that's a great point, BreadFan, and we at IJ know that all too well. Just 2 years ago, our talented strategic research team published the 3rd edition of our groundbreaking study, License to Work. It cataloged over 2,700 licensing requirements that governments across the country impose on a sample of over 100 common occupations like barbering, locksmithing, and even interior design. We found that, on average, these licensing requirements cost Americans nearly an extra year of education and hundreds of dollars in licensing and examination fees. Workers in 71 of the occupations we studied, including all of the barbering and cosmetology occupations, faced more stringent licensing requirements than entry-level emergency medical technicians. When it's harder for you to legally braid someone's hair than it is for you to save their life, something isn't working. The good news is that thanks to organizations like IJ and common sense Americans like you, occupational licensing requirements are becoming less burdensome with time. If you want to learn more about our fight against unnecessary licensure, check out our License to Work study on our website at www.ij.org. B. Bergley writes in, holding Moon personally responsible may not bring formal structural change, but if you got a judgment against one fish cop, all the fish cops will think twice about abusing their authority. Well, you've hit on something important, Bergley. When we at IJ bring lawsuits challenging unconstitutional government action, we're not just thinking about holding an individual officer responsible, we're focused on making the law better for everyone. That's why we love working with people like Pennsylvania fish cop client Tim Thomas. He's litigating the case in honor of his late wife, Stephanie, who used their lakeside cabin as a sanctuary while she bravely fought stage 4 cancer. He knows firsthand the pain and suffering caused by unconstitutional government intrusion, and he's fighting to make sure no one else experiences what he did. That takes courage. And as long as there are people out there like Tim who have the courage to fight back against these kinds of constitutional abuses, we at IJ will be there fighting right alongside them. Thanks again for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe for more videos.